Welcome to the Being Known podcast with my friend, the Ring of Desire, Dr. Desire.
Oh my gosh. And my friend Pepper Sweetie. Oh my gracious.
We are here to discover and explore what it means to be truly known. Hey, Curt.
Hey, Pep.
It's good to see you again, my friend.
Yeah, it's usually the case.
9 times out of 10. Can I get a 9 times out of 10? I'll take it.
Yeah.
Most people don't have those odds in my favor like that. I'll take it. I take it. My shtick wears people down pretty quickly. I'm well aware.
You mean the stick with which you beat me?
Not stick. Shtick. It's a completely different word.
It's yes. Stick. It's stick with a lisp coming from the back of your throat.
That's exactly right. We've talked about that in the past.
Yeah, that's right. You have. Okay.
We are here in episode 4 of season 8 of the Being Known podcast. We are putting ourselves in the path of oncoming beauty. And today we are talking about as beauty makes sense of us. I love that title.
Yeah, I had. It's funny. We've talked so far about us being the active party. I'm going to put myself in the path of oncoming beauty, right. Whether that is a practice of encountering something in nature or artistic on a regular cadenced basis. If I'm going to then prepare myself to look for beauty in the places where I might least expect to find it, or allowing others to look for it in me, especially in those places where my trauma lives. But we don't often necessarily think of, I look at a painting and then we say, well, tell me what that's like for you. You ask me, what do I feel? Not even like what I think of it, although we could ask that question, but what is that like for me? And I'm the one who's answering the question, what is it like? But what does it mean for beauty to actually make sense of us? What is it like for me to have the experience of having an encounter with beauty, and that beauty doing something within me that reveals something to me about me? I think about the story that you tell of the walk that you went on in near your home, and you find yourself on the bridge.
Yes. Yeah.
And the heron.
Yes.
After, this is with the poetry of Wendell Berry and and then you have this encounter. And I'm wondering if you could just for a minute, just replay that real quickly for us. I'd love to.
It was during the COVID pandemic, and I had decided to take Wendell Berry's poem, "The Peace of Wild Things," and put it to memory, because the poem really speaks to me, and especially in that time, really, resonated with me, and I wanted to have access to it, like all the time. I didn't want to have to read it. I didn't, I wanted to be able to pull it from my mind and embody it and feel it. And so I went on these walks, because what else did you do during COVID but go on walks? So I went on these walks, and while I was on these walks, I was memorizing the poem. I was going through it. I would start with it. I had it pulled up on my phone, and I would look at it and read it and memorize it. And this was towards the end of towards the process where I was really getting really close to having the whole thing memorized. And the end of my walk takes me to through a park and to the crest of this wooden bridge that sits over the South Fork of Gunpowder Creek. And the Wendell Berry in his poem talks about the going to the place where the great heron feeds, where the wood drake rests in its beauty, and the great heron feeds. And as I'm saying those words, I look down to my left down the creek, as I was accustomed to doing. I would go there, usually take a picture of the creek because it was ever changing. in each direction. And as I was looking to my left down the direction the creek was flowing, um, I saw something moving. And then I realized that I was watching a great heron feeding. And between the great heron and myself, there was something swimming in the water. And although it wasn't a wood drake, it was this beautiful mallard who, just as I was realizing what it was, took flight and came right towards me
Oh
to the point
my
that as it flew over me, I could hear the wind of its
God.
wings rushing past. And I turned and watched it fly down the other direction of the creek and around the bend. And to say that my body was covered in goosebumps,
Mm,
and I
mm,
was just, I was literally embodying what was happening there.
mm, mm,
It was an incredible moment.
mm,
I couldn't,
mm,
and then my first thing was like, I can't wait to tell Curt and Amy about this,
mm, mm,
you
mm,
know, because
mm.
you guys knew that I was working with this poem, yeah, so it was quite a moment. It was quite a moment.
So you've just described the moment. I'm wondering, can you say more about, as time has passed,
Hmm.
whether it was in the immediacy just following that moment? In what way would you say that, having experienced that, in what way would you say that what did then and has since shaped what you are thinking about anything else?
It's a great question. Um, I think that having that experience, um, first of all, it um, the feeling of it was incredible, right?
Mm, mm,
It
mm,
was it was a real euphoric kind of moment.
mm,
And it also solidified. It was like a branding of those
mm,
words to my core.
mm,
So
mm,
so
mm,
that, the poem, when it talks about, um, when I wake in despair, at the least sound, and he's talking about worrying about his children's lives and what they may be in my own life, um, and then going to this place, and finding the peace of wild things. Um, it There was a relief of my anxiety that happened,
mm,
I
mm,
would say,
mm,
through that process, and this just was like the soldering of that to me
mm, mm,
in a lot of
mm,
ways.
mm,
Um, and
mm,
then, I think it also inspired me um, to keep seeking beauty, to keep paying
mhm,
attention to what I'm paying attention to,
mhm, mhm,
um, because I was given that moment.
mhm, mhm,
Um, and then I was able to share that moment with you.
mhm,
Um, it,
mhm,
it, uh, it was a real sort of encouragement to the work of, um, chasing beauty
hmm,
and
hmm,
putting myself in the path of it.
hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just feel like this is a great jumping off story
Hmm.
for us as we consider this notion that beauty becomes an integrator of our minds, of our souls.
Hmm.
That we don't just create beauty, but when we encounter it, beauty, as von Balthasar would say, the Catholic theologian would say that beauty and our sensory experience of it is the leading edge of our encounter with God. That goodness is the quality of that which beauty is, and
Hmm.
truth is how we make sense of the things that we have first encountered. Which is interesting because that's kind of how the brain works. We've said bottom to top and right to left. First we sense, and then we make sense of what we sense. And beauty enables us, our encounters with it draw our minds into becoming more than what they are. I think you had that experience, and then you decide, you commit to doing something. You begin to practice imagining something. You begin to practice looking for something in a particular way. We've talked about how we can encounter beauty in terms of like the intention that you went for the walk. You chose to pause and look down the creek and then follow the mallard. You're a participant in that. Mm-hmm. And you're also a recipient of what it's offering to you. And then you're changed by that. And this is what we would say God wants to do with all of our trauma. God wants us to be open to beauty. Now, of course, to be open to it is a vulnerable act. Now that we are where we are in relationship to COVID, we're back at hard-paced schedules, and we're not taking lots of walks, crossing the creek as easily as we did. We have to work we have to work to do that. Yep. But in so doing, we give our bodies an opportunity to do what they were made to do. This notion that we first encounter the world through our right hemisphere in many respects, this sense that I am sensing things, what the right hemisphere of my brain does. It senses, it images, it feels. It gives me a holistic experience. It gives me the experience of nonverbal communication, all that was happening for you on that bridge, both the sound and the sensation and so forth. It gives us an integrated map of the body, my right hemisphere does. And then it also provides this posture of withness. Mm-hmm. I have the sense that I'm with this this moment, this experience. I'm not distant from it, analyzing it. I am with it. But soon, that experience crosses the corpus callosum, that strip of tissue in between the right and the left hemisphere of our brain, and it moves to the left hemisphere where our process of linear and logic and language takes place. My literal sense of the word that I can say, oh, that is a mallard. I can say that. I can identify that from the distance. Mm-hmm. It also gives me a posture of being apart from things, which I need to be able to do. I want to be able to, for this reason. When you have the experience, then you reflect upon it. And I reflect upon, now I'm distancing myself from it just a bit to see it, and then to decide, oh my gosh, I want to do this again. I want to practice putting myself in a position in which this can repeat itself over and over and over again. Last week we talked a little bit about this work I'm trying to do at forgiveness.
Yeah.
And as I am entering into it, I'm aware that I have an experience of being with Jesus and being with another person. And that experience is transforming my relationship to the other person. And I have that experience, but then I actually complete that particular time that might take a few minutes. And then I reflect on, what just happened? And then I think, this is what's happened. And then this is what I want to do again and again and again. Mm-hmm. Now I have a choice of reflecting on what just happened and thinking, I want to do that again. Or something else can come up at another time of the day in which I'm actually easily tempted to go revisit the old pathway of holding a grudge and of being angry. I can do that. As we said last week, it's not just a matter of like, once I forgive him, it's all done and I never have to worry about being tempted to go back to my old. No, I have to walk in the way of forgiveness and allow that forgiveness to do its work in me. So it does something to me to allow myself to be in that space, but it requires my willingness to analyze it enough to say, oh my gosh, this is a good thing. Now I'm going to practice doing this. And in this way, beauty starts to make sense of me. Meaning, now that I am a couple of weeks into this, more than a couple of weeks into this work of forgiveness, for example, I'm recognizing that I am imagining these relationships in ways that are literally beautiful,
Mm.
and the possibility for hopefulness, the possibility of imagining being with these people in a room and looking forward to being in that space. Now, I don't mean all of them, because I'm still working on stuff
Right.
that has to do with the parts of me that have told a story and have felt hurt and so forth. It's not actually about them. It's actually about the part of me
Hmm.
that I'm having to really work on and work through. But what that means is that in allowing myself to sit with beauty in that way, it is making sense of me.
Right.
I'm not the one who's in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
And so, this reminds me of this. We've talked about this on other occasions. This, the very first time I had an encounter with a Mark Rothko
Yeah.
painting, and I'm sitting there for 20 minutes or more, and first you're like, okay, it's three bands of color. So what? If you pause long enough, then you start to see, oh, there's a lot more going on here than just three bands of color. And then I had this very strange moment where I was, things were starting to be evoked in me, feelings,
Hmm.
layers of things within me, and this sense that, like, my gosh, like I'm being seen by the painting, like the
Right.
painting is just making itself available, and in so doing, it's however we would kind of metaphysically talk about that, whatever's going on in the room, it's the work of the spirit. It's something is happening, which I would say God was using an artifact of beauty to get to me
Yeah.
in ways that no kind of intellectual manner of exploring would be able to. Like, it circumvents my left hemisphere. And I find myself sensing and feeling things like it is trying to help me come to an awareness of me. And this is not unlike what happens. We see this with patients, not uncommonly, when you sit with a patient, and a patient, if they're willing to allow you to gaze upon them, they start to feel things. And I'm not, you're not gazing, you're not staring at them, you're not boring into them, you're just simply gazing upon them with loving kindness. And we have that experience of being gazed upon with loving kindness so infrequently. And we tell such encased in concrete stories that to be gazed upon is to be devoured, that when we allow ourselves to be seen by beauty, it first can feel disruptive. It's overwhelming. It's not necessarily always a beautiful thing, because if I allow myself to be seen, if I allow myself to be in the presence of beauty on its terms and not just on mine, right? I'm going to go look at a sunset, and I know what time I'm going. I know where I'm going to perch myself. I know how I'm going to be there. Like, I'm in charge of this whole thing. The sun just needs to do its thing for me, and then I'll feel what I'm going to feel, and then I'm going to go. But, like, I'm in charge. But that's not what happened to you on the creek.
Right.
And so the question for us is, in what ways will we allow the beauty of the world, the created world, like
Hmm.
the naturally created world, the beauty of, we talked about last week, architecture, like the humanly created world. We're going to get to some of that in just a moment.
Hmm.
How are we able to allow beauty to be something that integrates my mind? It draws my left and my right hemisphere together in ways that me just thinking all the time doesn't ever accomplish. I want to sort out my life. I want to solve my problems. I like what in the Soul of Desire. The opening story is of a man who I invited to just go be. We tried all the things, and I invited him to go be present with Rembrandt's Return of the Prodigal Son. And he's like,
Hmm.
this is like Naaman and Elisha, right? The general of the Assyrian king, who's like, Elisha says, yeah, go dunk in the Jordan 7 times. I'm not even going to see you. Go dunk. just go be with the river. It's
Right.
like, what the heck? Like, what is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so our doing this allows beauty to actually draw our mind together. My right coming to my left actually making a different kind of sense, telling a different story, being open to other ways of understanding my past and my future. And so this we get back to this thing that we are talking about throughout the course of our time, these three W's, four W's and three R's, this sense of like we're going to be, that beauty is a matter of wonder that welcomes us to worship, and worship not just because God is insecure and demands it of us, but because when we're in the presence of beauty in our own vulnerable states, worship is what we're naturally drawn to, but it requires work. I love coming back to that word that you added to that list, that it requires work for us to do this. It requires work for me to Sabbath
Yeah, for sure. For
in order
sure.
to allow beauty to integrate me, to draw my left and my right hemisphere, my middle prefrontal cortex and my brainstem together such that I can be at rest, I can be at peace, like the peace of wild things, so that I can have things be revealed. These three are to be revealed, then to be regenerated and healed, and to be recommissioned. So that whole notion of you have that encounter and then you recommission, you commission yourself. I'm going to now do this more frequently, which means I'm going to practice allowing my story to be told differently than I've been telling it up to this point. But, it requires work. It requires effort on our part to make a practice of allowing ourselves to be in the path of oncoming beauty.
Well, and you mentioned that, when this happened was in the that particular story happened in the middle of COVID. And now I'm back in the midst of, like we all are, back in the midst of just grinding it out and
Yeah.
so busy with work. So it requires more work for me
Mhm. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
to carve out the time. It's interesting because I don't know if I shared with you that so my Jeep is broken and
Mm.
it may be irreparable. I'm going Monday to meet with the guy. The frame broke. I mean,
Mm.
literally broke. And so, but I've been in the midst of travel for 3 weeks, and this happened like right before that travel started.
Yeah.
And so I have yet to be able to even get anything going. So
Mm.
I when I'm home now, I've been home now for a few days, and I'm stuck
Mm.
home. Like I work, I
Mm.
don't have a car. Like I don't have, so my wife takes her car to work and my daughter goes to school, and I'm all this to say it is, guess where I was yesterday with my dog on the
Dude.
bridge, because
Mm.
and so there's something about, I don't know, in my life there's something about, I almost have to be forced to keep these good habits. I almost
Yeah.
have to be, and and they are good habits. I
Mm-hmm.
feel I reap the benefits of them. And yet, and it almost takes a broken down car or
Mm-hmm.
COVID or
Mm-hmm.
something
Mm-hmm.
that forces me to stop
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so that I can give myself what I look at as the luxury
Mm-hmm.
of taking a walk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a confession. I mean, I
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and it makes such a huge difference in my life when I do it and when I have these habits, and
Yeah.
then yeah.
I want to just real quickly, there's a real brief story I want to tell. There is a young woman, her name is Ruby LaRocca, and she is a high school student, and she won a prize for an essay that she wrote on the Constitution for Teenage Happiness.
Okay.
And it is a beautiful essay. And in it, she talks about how, for her generation, for them to come to know comfort and confidence and peacefulness and integrity,
Yep.
She's encouraging them to get this, read great books,
Yeah.
and memorize poetry.
Yeah.
Right. And the essay is beautiful. And it's coming from I think like a 17-year-old, 16 or
Wow.
17-year-old, who is saying to her generation, like we all do, it's kind of like when patients come to see me, without knowing it, they come in and they are symptomatic, and they're symptomatic because of how they've been living their life.
Yeah.
They don't think necessarily that they're symptomatic because of how they're living. They think they're just symptomatic, kind of like I picked up these symptoms. I have panic and distress. I'm depressed. I'm this. I'm that. Right. And without knowing it, always, what they are often asking for is they want a reduction and then elimination of their symptoms, but they don't want to change the way they're living their life.
Right.
They don't know this. That they're not consciously aware of this.
Yeah.
And so what Ruby is offering us is to say, as opposed to like I come in and what you'll see is that as the moment that we start to have a conversation with my patients about like what's happening in their lives and what are some things that we're going to do differently about these kinds of things, what you find is that they want to how, Curt, can I continue to apply the tactics I'm currently using in my life to now reduce my symptoms in my life? And I'm like, yeah, this is the issue, including the stories that you are telling about yourself in your life. You're not aware that you're going to have to give those up. But we don't give them up by just magically doing something that we call giving them up. We give them up by actually beginning to tell other stories. And the way that we do it, for which Ruby is suggesting to her teenage generation, is
Right.
we live life differently. I'm going to submit myself. I'm going to surrender myself to memorizing poetry. Well, gosh, that's going to take time. Yeah. Well, but I've got things on my phone that I'm scrolling. Yeah, that you're not going to be able to do that. It's going to cost you something. Beauty always costs us something. But the thing that it costs us ultimately is our anxiety and our depression and our distress and my
Yeah.
terror and my shame. That's what it costs me ultimately.
Yeah.
And so it takes a lot of effort to not let the world squeeze us into its mold, but to allow beauty to have its way with us. And it takes work for us frequently to be present with beauty in a way that is not just on our terms. And we can have these kinds of encounters with nature. Last week, encounters with architecture. But this week, we're talking about how can we allow beauty to make sense of us by our submitting ourselves to something, even if it at first glance is not exactly what I might want it to be.
Yes. Yes. Which takes us to our artistic offering of this week, which is Dave Brubeck's Take Five. Let me start by saying that when when I was at university, Xavier University, they had a public radio station, WVXU, and I guess my sophomore year, well, I kind of anyway, yeah, my first year there, um, I got a spot on the radio, um, a coveted spot on
Mhm.
Friday afternoons, and we started off as the format was oldies, and you were responsible to basically program your own show. So I was on for a few hours in the late afternoon and would go get there early enough and select all the music that I was going to play and everything. And starting in my second year, they came in and they changed the format, and they came in and told me we were now switching to jazz. And you might as well have, I don't know, it was not something that I was familiar with. I hadn't really been exposed to jazz in any way, and I just thought, uh-oh, I got to program this, I got to figure this out. Um, so I started off really, I would say softly, really
Mhm.
soft
Mhm.
jazz, a lot of fusion kind of stuff like Spyro Gyra, the Yellow Jackets, Jaco Pastorius on bass. And it was because that was a little more familiar to the kind of music that I was familiar with. So one of the older guys that, everybody wasn't a student that was on the radio. So one of the older guys that was there, that was a huge jazz guy, he started, trying to get me to go out with him to hear live jazz. And so we'd go up to the Blind Lemon and we'd go, different spots, and we would hear jazz. And I'm like, man, it took a while, but I'm really starting to get this, what this whole straight ahead jazz is with improvisation. And I loved Ray Brown Trio, Miles Davis, Charlie Parker. And, to the point that I had a class that was philosophy of art and beauty. And in that class, the final paper, I decided to do a comparing and contrasting of impressionist art with experimental improvisational jazz. And so I really kind of took a deep dive into this at the time. And the reason why, and I mentioned this last week, but the reason why I chose Dave Brubeck's Take 5 was I believe it's a real bridge to a lot of music, a whole genre of music that I think people could love if they give it a chance. Because I think that jazz can be a little bit intimidating as an art form, especially if you take a deep dive like right away into it. It doesn't sometimes some of it doesn't make a lot of sense, and it sounds so different than what we're used to hearing, and those kind of things. Anyway, Dave Brubeck's Take 5 was actually written by Paul Desmond, who was his saxophone player. The story goes that Brubeck challenged Desmond to write a song that was written in an unusual meter, a 5/4 meter. Now, I'm going to be speaking at the, again, very edge of my intelligence here, because I'm not a music major. I have very little music talent. I can appreciate music. That's about as far as it goes. But
and you can dance
if I want to. So the five normal music, the most of the music back at that time, and most music today, is in a 4/4 meter, 4 beats per measure, or some waltzes which are in like a 3 beats per meter kind of thing. So he's gonna write this song in a 5/4 meter, right? So the 5/4 meter, he wrote to a certain point, and then he basically said, I can't take it any further. It's just not working. And Brubeck was like, well, you've got two songs, so you got 2 melodies here. Let's make it work. So they figured it out. And what they did was they take this unusual 5/4 meter, and on top of that, they lay this blues kind of tempo on top of it that we're more used to hearing. And then underneath it, you've got this other thing, and they come together in what some people have called the greatest jazz composition of all time. I mean, I think even our listeners that maybe jazz isn't their thing, I think they will, even maybe there's a familiarity to it because it's been recorded by so many different people and so many different times. I want to talk a little bit about, we'll put a link to this YouTube video in the show notes. There is a recording of this song that is incredible. I mean, it's filmed. First of all, it's not video, it's filmed. It's back in the day. It's black and white. And it's all these guys that basically look like accountants, playing their instruments, but they've allowed within the composition, they allow improvisation. And you see these guys looking at each other as as one guy's going on, is playing the sax, say, and he's going off on his improv. The rest of them are looking, and there's almost what appears to be almost like a sternness to them, but what they're doing is like they're like taking it in and listening, because they know that they want to add their and to it. They want to add their yes, and to the improvisation, and staying within the melody and everything. It's just beautiful to watch that integration
Hmm.
You know, um, so I think a little bit of an interesting fact about Brubeck is his parents wanted him to be a doctor. He was sitting in a chemistry class and
I
he's
love
looking out
this.
the window, watching all the students going into the conservatory, staring at him, and the professor's like finally looks at him and just go change your major. You're in the wrong place. And
Hmm.
so he did, and that's how we've been blessed um, with Dave Brubeck and all of his great music. And this one
Hmm.
is definitely at the top. Um, I think I would encourage people to if you I shared last week that I one of the things that I did with this song was I put it in my earbuds and I took a walk, and the whole time I was walking I listened to it kind of over and over again and and it was so interesting the way that it became sort of the soundtrack of everything that was happening to me on that
Hmm.
walk.
Hmm.
And um, it was almost like an immersion, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Immersion
Hmm.
in the nature that was around me with the music that was playing,
Hmm.
and so if you listen to this song and if you find it, um, give it more than one listen. And hopefully
Hmm.
you had some of you had the opportunity to do it last week, but give it more than one listen. And I think it has a potential to open up doors to
Hmm.
other music that you may not have been part of your
Yeah.
over.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Well,
yeah,
man, I first of all, thank you so much for drawing my and Amy's attention to this. It's been really fabulous to have this experience of just putting it on a loop,
yeah,
listening to it, and discovering what starts to emerge as you sense like, oh my gosh, no, here's another experience of beauty making sense of me by pulling things out of me that you don't know about.
yeah, yeah.
I think that and another uh, reason that this is really meaningful is I think in many respects, Pep, this piece, uh, you at first you start to listen to it and you're thinking like, okay, whatever. It's just it seems kind of rather bland and it doesn't seem. But like you said, like watching the video
Yeah,
and watching the expectant movement, like people
right.
watching each other and these subtle changes, it's not like they stop and say, okay, now Sam, you take over. No, there's this fluid movement from one to the next.
It's integration at its finest. I mean,
Dude.
yeah, I mean, those guys, when musicians can do that, first of all, it comes from playing together over and over and over again. It's, you know, there are those, Charlie Parker could come and sit in with anybody and improvise, but that integrated state that those guys are in that video to me is really a great example of the work that that you do and that we're trying to do here on the podcast.
And in many respects, these, like you said, these are guys who, like you listen to jazz and you think, oh, it's like, I don't really, maybe I don't understand it. Maybe it's kind of hard to make sense of and so
Right.
forth. You don't have the sense that these guys have like practiced for hours and hours and hours and
Oh,
hours at a craft that actually has a number of fundamental rules. But those fundamental ways of living according to the way the jazz is to operate, then is what gives you the freedom to do what these guys are doing, but not without a lot of work. That's that fourth W
yeah.
that we talk about when it
Yeah.
comes to beauty. And just to say that many of our lives contain things that can feel like I don't understand it. I'm too overwhelmed to figure that out. Kind of like what it would be like approaching jazz. I don't really get that. I can't really, unless you're willing to allow yourself to put it in your earbuds
Yeah.
and put it on a loop and say, look, to allow beauty to help me make sense of me is going to take lots of repetition. It's going to take lots of me telling my story. It's not going to happen in one telling of my story. I may have the life in which my we have said on this podcast before, we've told stories of people who, they grew up in families, and those families are still around. Families who, even as we are, adults in our 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, we have parents who continue to behave badly.
Yeah.
We have old parts of our stories that continue to be generated, and we're going to continue to have to work at this. And what the good news of the gospel is that if we allow beauty, if we allow ourselves to be in its path, it will not just be something that we make sense of, but something that enables us to be made sense. It makes sense of us, especially when we do so in the presence of community, which is, your reflections and research on this, Pep, give all of our listeners an opportunity to be invited into this space that gives everybody an opportunity for growth that heretofore they didn't know was possible. So thanks so much. This has been great.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you. This has been great. Love you. And I have a couple more thoughts on this. We'll save them for the post show with Amy. If you're on YouTube, you'll be able to join us.
Are we making our recommendation for people to follow?
Yes, we are. Thank you for the reminder. Yes.
Yeah.
So we're going to delve into the cinema this next week. And full disclosure, one of my favorite movies of all time.
Me too. Yeah.
Dumbo. No. One of my favorite movies of all time is The Shawshank Redemption. And I would love for you, if you have the opportunity, to watch it this week, because we're going to talk about it next week. This is a powerful, beautiful film, and there's just so much in it. There's so much in it, and I'm excited to talk about it next week.
Right on.
Thanks for that reminder.
Yeah.
All right. See ya.
Hi, guys.
And we welcome our producer into the studio.
What did you say, Pep?
Producer Amy.
Producer Amy. Okay, you have more thoughts, Pep.
No, so this week I was working. One of the things I did this week was there was a CEO of a company that has a big speech coming up, and someone that's working with her invited like 4 people to come virtually and watch this speech and give notes. And one of the people on the call, when we were in the notes process, said something to the effect of, you're not going to want to rehearse this that much because you want to have a real moment, to be real on stage. And I'm like coming out of my skin. Like that is so opposite of the core of every one of my beliefs when it comes to public speaking, when it comes to, it's, you work your tail off on this.
You know it in your sleep.
You know it in your sleep. You know it inside and out and frontwards and backwards, so that you can have the freedom when you're on stage to let what happens happen. But you can't go on stage without having done the work. This is, the repetitive work, because you want a real moment on stage. It just drives me absolutely nuts. It's you have to do that repetitive work in order to have the freedom to allow things to happen. But you can't just go up there willy-nilly and allow the thing to happen.
Right.
Believe me, I've seen people try it. Don't ask me how I know this. Just trust me that I do. It doesn't work.
That's a Mary Graham saying. Don't ask me how I know this. And that's totally what kept coming up for me as you guys were talking, was the work and the cost. Like Curt, you said there's work involved and there's a cost from beauty. And we've talked about this before, but that there is work and there is cost no matter what.
Right. That's right.
And we can choose to spend it on beauty. And like Pep, when you said jazz you can love jazz if you just give it a chance. And and that takes me back to the work, but like Dave Brubeck challenged Paul Desmond to write this piece. And then and we're doing this work because as I was prepping for this, I read that Joe Morello, the drummer who usually soloed and this is also on the edge of my intelligence, the five, I could say the words, 5/4 time, he asked Dave Brubeck to compose a piece that amplified his gifting. So there's,
oh my gosh,
right?
Yeah.
Right.
That's awesome. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Well, and it's just, and then Dave Brubeck, then they came up with 2 melodies, then,
right.
And it's like, okay, that's the work. But okay. So then the work is listening to that piece the first time. I was like, okay, I'm going to keep putting myself in the path of this, but then knowing the story, because that's like memorizing Wendell-Berry, putting yourself in front of Rothko and not walking away, knowing, like, I think it's Gary Smalley that said, and I paraphrase, if you have a friend that doesn't like football, tell them a story about a player.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, then they're interested in football.
That's the whole marketing campaign for the Olympics every year.
Right.
It's all about story. And honestly, as I approach these sort of artistic offerings that we're doing, I don't want to put myself out there as, an expert in music. I don't want to put myself out there, but I want to tell a story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to tell a story about it, about how it can impact you and how it, that's the whole thing. It all comes down to story.
Well, think about this. I'm thinking like just the notion that we like to talk about the fact that everything that we do as human beings is part of the story that we're telling.
Yeah.
Right. The way I enjoy a meal, I might not be using words in the moment, but I'm telling a story in the way that I enjoy that. I think about, Pep, this whole notion of prepping a speaker or prepping an actor preparing for the role, is not unlike any artist, even if that artist is Joe Burrow.
Right.
Like you watch Joe Burrow, or Amy, if you watch
Patrick Mahomes,
the name that shall not be spoken,
or Purdy.
Sorry,
okay.
yeah. All right. So, but if you watch these guys, like their physicality, like it is poetic. Like it is beautiful to watch this person drop back in whatever they're going to do. Like you watch this, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is beautiful, and then post-game show will run us through that final drive or whatever it is. Nobody in the post-game show says, so take us through training camp.
Yeah.
Take us through what the price was that you paid. Like we know about the final drive. The final drive lasted, you did it in a minute and 7 seconds. You did that, but like, that just didn't happen in a minute, 7 seconds. That happened for like hours and hours and hours. Like, how many reps do you think that you've thrown?
Right.
Yeah, nobody asks that.
to Kels on the curl route. Like, how many reps? Like, what's it like to have to throw like 40 reps, right? Over and over.
So much that it's just in your body, that it just
right,
automatic.
And we live in a world in which what I really want is the relief that I want to be able to perform like Mahomes. I just don't have to work like he works.
Right.
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 I want to be able eventually to, I'm going to go to that. I'm going to go to that 7-minute piece of take 5, and I want to be able to listen to it and like that. I want to enjoy it.
Get it.
Yeah.
I don't want to. I don't want to have to like be. I don't want to wonder like what am I doing. I don't have to wonder. I don't have to do that work. Right. And evil is counting on this.
Right.
Yeah. Evil is counting on our just wanting to enjoy something as opposed to recognize the whole thing. Everything is part of the storytelling process. I'm not only just telling the story in the 67-second final drive.
Right.
I'm telling the story in training camp.
Yeah.
And we so desperately need other people like, Burrow, Mahomes, like they need their quarterback coach. They need somebody else watching. What are they doing? What are they doing? What are they doing? I'm sure that in that in that jazz piece, like each of those members is like looking for ways to help the others improve without condemnation, without condemnation.
Mm-hmm.
And this notion of how, we are taking this deep dive into this topic because we want our listeners to have the sense that the work is worth it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That we will be transformed and we will become agents of this very transformational beauty in the world to the degree that we allow our stories to be submitted to oncoming beauty and then be curious about it in the way that we've been made to be curious about it. And part of that process requires repetitive work. That when we do it in community, and we're not by ourselves in it, we discover that this is something that really is changing me, and other people will see this and they will long for that, and so I become an agent of transformation for others as well. In the same way that Take 5 has been so transformational for so many musicians down the line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. You will, we'll look at, I mean, if you were to name, not necessarily particularly an artist, but you could take whatever the Billboard, number one hit is right now, today, in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
There's a good chance, there's a better than likely chance that 5 years from now, let alone 10 or 20 years from now, nobody will have any idea.
Yep.
As long as people pay attention to music, Take 5 will be in the library and on our minds.
So Brubeck donated his proceeds at death to the Red Cross, and they make $100,000 a year off the proceeds,
off the interest.
Red Cross does,
Totally made me think of bottom left drawer, not a pitch, but
yeah,
it totally made me think of that.
It's fine. Yeah, totally.
Because he was intentional and it's going where he wanted it to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know we got to go. The work is worth it. And we're learning what the work is, because I would say the enemy doesn't even want us to know that there is work to be done. Like just say, I don't get it and move on. I don't know and move on. And it's like, this is the work and it's so worth it.
Right. And that's what we do with our stories. It's too much. The work is too much.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That happened to me when I was 20. I'm never going to be able to change that.
Right.
My dad will never, my parents are hopeless. My marriage is hopeless. My drug addicted son is hopeless. It's like, what else can I do? I'm just going to go. I don't want to do the work. And we want to say, the work in community is where it happens.
Mm-hmm.
I just think about that, okay, take Dave Brubeck, this brilliant guy, and if it's just him at the piano, nothing else happens.
Right.
Something happens, but
all
the other stuff.
Right. I always go back to what Bono said about, when he said the best pop songwriter at the time was Prince, in his opinion. He said, but Prince doesn't have a band to push back on him.
Oh, right.
And so he puts out 37 songs that are not very good, and then hits his genius on a couple. But if he had a band that pushed back on him,
what would that be like?
I would never want to be a solo act. And it hasn't been easy. These guys, think about spending the rest of your life with the friends that you had when you were 14, right? I mean, that's a little rough, but they, they fought through those times, and they just put out a new song today, by the way.
Oh, did they?
You too. Yeah. Interesting.
Okay.
Interestingly enough. Anyway.
But Pep, to your point, I mean, that song Take 5 has become a soundtrack, right? I can hear it when you said that. I'm like, dun, 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 dun. It does become us.
It really does. Don't hum too much of it, because we'll have to pay the Red Cross.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
It's great to see you guys. Thank you
for
today.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you. Next week.
Bye.
This podcast is produced by Curt Thompson, Pepper Sweeney, and myself, Amy Chella. Audio production and editing is by Keaton Simons. Video production and editing is done by Mark Gould. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on social media at Being Known Pod. If you like this podcast, tell a friend. If you love this podcast, tell everyone you know. And please like, rate, and review wherever you listen. Be well, be now.